This video is now in session, and today we're going to look at the 2022 Senate election in the aftermath of the 2021 elections in Virginia and New Jersey. So, the Virginia and the New Jersey elections showed that the Democrats are really not at a good state right now. Joe Biden's approval rating is in one of the worst negatives seen in modern American history, with the exception of Donald Trump. And what we're seeing is that in Virginia and New Jersey, those kinds of low approval ratings are causing really bad elections for the Democratic Party. So the Democrats had high hopes for 2022, which is that they would gain seats in the Senate, at least 2 seats in the Senate, that would allow them to end the filibuster. But it seems like that's not going to happen anymore. It seems like that Virginia and New Jersey has shown that Democrats should be more in reality, because their elections show that the Democrats simply will have a hard time even gaining 1 seat in the Senate, even keeping the seats that they currently have. So let's go through the list. In the safe Republican column, we have states like Idaho and Utah. So Idaho, Utah, Indiana, South Dakota, North Dakota, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Alabama, South Carolina, Kentucky, we'd also say is safe. Indiana, we'd say is safe. And yeah, and so is Missouri. Missouri would also be safe, because even though Eric Greitens is a bad candidate, even if he does win the Republican primary in 2022, the Democratic challenger is not going to be, no matter who it is, it's not going to be good enough to go against Eric Greitens, because of the national environment, which is heavily against the Democratic Party. Now let's go over to the safe Democratic seats. We have Washington, we have Oregon, California, New York, Vermont, Connecticut, and Maryland. That's it. And Hawaii. And we'd actually even say Oregon is not a safe Senate race. So that's the state of play for the Democrats right now. It's not really good, because Illinois and Oregon are both not safe seats. They are likely seats, and that's because of the voters in Illinois. Voters in Illinois, especially in southern Illinois, will most likely turn out in droves, just like how Republicans in southern Jersey turned out in droves to vote for Jack Ciattarelli. The same thing will happen in this 2022 Senate race, which I believe Tammy Duckworth should be up for re-election in this race. It's either Tammy Duckworth or Dick Durbin. But no matter who it is, there's going to be setback in for the Illinois Democrats, because southern Republican Illinois, because individuals in southern Illinois will definitely break previous records of voting to go for the Republican Party. In Oregon, the same thing applies to rural Oregon, because there is a large swath outside of Portland that is just full of rural Republicans, and thus we can safely say that we can say as of now that Oregon will most likely be a likely seat. Illinois, same thing. And if we look at the likely Democratic seats, those are really the only two those are really the only two. For the Republican side, we have a lot more. We have Iowa, Ohio, Alaska, and that's pretty much the seats. And we could even say North Carolina. We could make, I guess, like an argument for that. And we can even make an argument that Wisconsin would be likely, because both areas have a lot of rural voters, and both areas also, or I guess Wisconsin in particular, has a lot of working class voters. So that will benefit the Republican Party in the 2022 election. But for now, we're gonna rate those 3 seats as lean. But for Wisconsin, it's pretty close to being a likely seat at this moment. And that's because, again, the national mood is against the Democratic Party. So that's the likely seats for the Republicans. You can see Ohio. It's going to be very hard for the Democrats to come back. What will most likely happen is an expansion of the Republican victory in 2020, in 2022, because you have more competitive voters, more independents in Ohio, move into the Republican Party in 2022 because they are not being represented by the Democrats in Congress. Iowa, same thing applies. Alaska, same thing applies. So those are the likely and safe seats for for both the Democrats and the Republicans. Moving over to the lean seats, we mentioned Wisconsin and North Carolina already. Actually, Florida should be likely, not lean. Florida, what we'll most likely see is that Florida is weird because it doesn't quite follow the national trends, and the same thing will apply here, which is that the 2022 election will most likely look like the 2016 Senate election rather than something larger than that previous election. So that's Florida. For the lean Republican seats, Wisconsin, North Carolina. At this point, we could even make the judgment that New Hampshire without Chris Sununu would be a lean Republican seat. And then we also have Pennsylvania, and yeah, those are the seats for the Republican side. And then for the Democratic side, we would say that Colorado would be a lean seat. And then we might as well also fill out the tilt seats: Nevada tilt seat, Arizona tilt seat, and then Georgia tilt seat. So if we go over the lean states, New Hampshire may seem surprising because Chris Sununu has not announced his intentions to run for the 2022 Senate, but we'd be confident right now saying that New Hampshire would be lean Republican even without him, because New Hampshire has a lot of working class voters. They have a lot of rural voters, and a lot of them disapprove what Biden is doing. They are not in favor with what happened with what the Democrats are doing in Congress. And even though New Hampshire voted for Biden by 7% in the 2020 election, Virginia voted for Biden by 10%, by double digits. And it flipped in 2021. The governor's race flipped from Democratic to Republican. There was a 12-point shift from Biden to Youngkin in that race. So it's not out of the question to say that in New Hampshire we could see that kind of flip occur, but and it wouldn't even, and it's not even that much of a flip between what Maggie Hassan had in 2016 and what she might have in 2022, because she won this Senate race by very narrow margins. She won by a tilt margin in the 2016 election, so it wouldn't be surprising, it wouldn't be out of the question to say that it could go to becoming a lean Republican seat in that Senate race. So that's our judgment for New Hampshire. For Pennsylvania, it's like Wisconsin. There are a lot of middle-class voters, or rather, there are a lot of working-class voters, blue-collar workers, as well as rural Pennsylvanians who could very well turn out in droves for the Republican Party. And that will be a problem for the 2022 Democrats, which is that rural areas will almost certainly turn out in droves to impact Senate races and governor's races. For those races, it's very hard for the Democrats to for those areas of population area. For those population areas, it's very hard for the Democrats to work on because rural America has become so Republican. Which is why the only way to really solve that issue is to counteract the growth by rural Republicans by having much more urban Democrats vote in the 2022 election. But as Democrats have seen before, it's very hard to do that. As they saw in 2020, it was incredibly hard to get urban Democrats to vote in the 2020 election. Now that they really haven't done anything between 2020 and 2022, then how in the world will the Democrats convince their urban base to turn out in droves? It's going to be very hard, and that's why we currently rate Pennsylvania as a lean Republican seat. In terms of Colorado is similar to Virginia in its political political situation, which is that it's becoming more democratic, but it can also very well flip it can very well also narrow up the margins in a favorable year for the Republican Party. Now, we wouldn't really be willing to say that Colorado would flip to the Republican Party because there is a difference. First of all, Virginia voted for Biden by around 10.1 percentage points. Colorado voted for Biden by around 13.5 percentage points. So if we apply the shift seen in Virginia between 2020 and 2021 to Colorado, then the Democrats would still win by lean margins. The other difference here is that Michael Bennet, who is the incumbent senator of Colorado, will run for re-election, and he is eligible to run for re-election. That is different from Virginia, where you saw Terry McAuliffe as not the incumbent. Ralph Northam, who was the incumbent, is not eligible to run for re-election, and as a result, he was not up for the Democratic ticket in 2021. That's another difference that will influence this Colorado race, and that's why we rate it as lean rather than either tilt Democratic or tilt Republican. And then finally, we have these 3 seats. So the reason why we put Nevada in the tilt Democratic column is it's similar to Florida in that it is incredibly inelastic, and it also frequently bucks the trend, the national trends. What we saw in the 2020 election was not much of a shift in Nevada. In the 2016 election, what we saw was a greater margin of victory between 2016 than in 2020, and yet Donald Trump won that election. So we would put this seat as tilt Democratic. The other thing is that Catherine Cortez Masto is still relatively popular with her constituents, and in Nevada, it's been a Democratic state for a very long time. And the last time a Republican was elected was a very long time ago. So it is possible, especially because in Virginia, the last time a statewide Republican was elected was in 2009. So it is doable, but we'd still rate it as tilt Democratic. And then finally, we have Arizona and Georgia. The reason why we still put Arizona in the Democratic column is because Mark Kelly amidst the political zeitgeist that is occurring, Mark Kelly still remains popular with Arizonans. So he represents a special kind of candidate who would get affected by the national mood, but would still most likely win his election in 2022. In Georgia, what we're likely to see is that even though Raphael Warnock is in such a competitive state, Georgia Democrats have proven that they're really good at campaigning and that they're really good at turning out the vote, especially from voters of color. So it's likely that with Stacey Abrams running in the 2022 governor's election, that Raphael Warnock could potentially pull off a win, especially if Donald Trump chooses to meddle in this race. So that's the end of this video, and I guess that's the ultimate outcome, which is that the Republicans flip one Senate seat in New Hampshire. You can see there's not really much of a change from 2020, and that's to be expected because what we're seeing at this point is ultra competitiveness in the United States. We're seeing incredibly competitive elections and incredibly narrow margins. So we're unlikely to see the same kinds of margins that we saw in 2014 by the Republican Party, even if they do steal the national spotlight from the Democratic Party. It doesn't seem like that they're going to be able to flip many seats because of how polarized this nation is and because of how changed this nation has become from 2009, from 2010, and from 2014. So that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.